SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
You better dust off your Duolingo apps because we are bringing Babel back to iGaming Daily as DraftKings has announced the launch of its Spanish version across the US and Canada. And I'm not speaking of Ryan Babel, because that's how you pronounce it. It's not Ryan Babel. That's like a bit of an old school reference. But talking about DraftKings, can this move help them thrive among Hispanic audiences ahead of the year of the World Cup? And speaking of football, Latin America is also back on iGaming Daily, as we will do a quick recap on Latin markets, as there has been a lot going on the regulatory front. So welcome to iGaming Daily, or should I say bienvenidos to iGaming Daily, supported by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and #1 player engagement platform. I'm Fernando, Noodt, media manager for SBC and co-host of iGaming Daily, and today joined by my other half, may I say. I'm a bit romantic here, maybe, but co-host Charlie Horner, SBC media manager, or maybe should I say Carlitos Horner. How are you?
I'm very well, Fer. It's great to be back on. Perhaps a little bit more comfortable talking about the Premier League career of Ryan Babel than I am the Spanish language, but other than that, all good, thanks.
And I mentioned Latin America, and we couldn't be discussing Latin America without one of SBC Noticias' finest, business journalist Damian Martinez. Dami, ¿cómo estás? How are you today?
All good, Fer. All good. It's always great to join you guys to speak about Latin America.
Yeah, it's been a while since you were last on the iGaming Daily podcast, but good to have you on again, because today we're going to do quite a mix. Like I said, first half, we're going to discuss the DraftKings decision to launch a Spanish version in the American and Canadian markets. But after the ad break, we're going to talk Latin America specifically. So stick around if you want to listen about Latin America. But first, let's begin with breaking down this DraftKings story. Charlie, they have just announced, like we said, the North American market is getting its own Spanish version. So why don't we get a little context on what happened?
Yeah, so DraftKings, obviously one of the big two online sports betting and online casino operators in the US. I think it's #1 based on handle, but #2 based on revenue. They've launched their app with Spanish functionality now. There's, I think, about 15% of the US population speak Spanish as a first language. So that's something like 45 million people, which is a huge market that is perhaps going untapped by operators at the moment. So yeah, DraftKings are launching in Spanish as a way to reach new audiences, personalize, localize a little bit more, and just engage with their Spanish-speaking users a little bit more than they would do if it was them engaging with the English version, really, which I think is, we talk about personalization and localization so much on the program and in our articles and things like that across the network, and this is just a great example of a really basic way of doing that functionality. So yeah, an interesting move by DraftKings, and something that they've been talking about for a little while. I think Jason Robbins mentioned it on their earnings call a few weeks ago. So this has been in the works for a little bit of time.
And a bit of a Christmas present for the Hispanic audiences across the Americas, across North America specifically, because we're 25 days away from Christmas. When did this happen? When did 2025 flew by so fast? But definitely something, a bit of a present for the Hispanic audience, and in a very crucial timing, maybe, if I may say, because we have the World Cup next year that will happen across Mexico, the US, and Canada. So how pivotal could the tournament be in activating Spanish first bettors in regulated US markets and Canadian markets?
Yeah, I think it could be huge, and I think this is part of the strategy from DraftKings. Look, soccer, football is a rapidly growing sport across the US. It has been for for the last decade, I would say. You can see that within the quality of the US men's national team now. It's getting much stronger than it has been in the past. But I would say that a lot of the interest in soccer across the US is probably driven by those Hispanic communities who are just, I guess, culturally more in tune with football compared to US, who sort of other groups of Americans who might be driven towards NFL, NBA, other sports like that, the other Americans' major leagues. With the World Cup coming up, what an opportunity to tap into that user base, tap into those demographics, give them the content that they want, and beat out the competition. Because look, it's a hugely competitive market between FanDuel and DraftKings. We see Fanatics, Bet365, and BetMGM even try to claw back some market share, but I think this is DraftKings asserting themselves as trying to be that number one sportsbook for all. Damian, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, though.
Well, like you said, Charlie, the Spanish-speaking community in the United States is growing every day. And the sports fanatic, especially in football, right now, Messi is creating kind of a revolution in soccer, like they call it, in the United States. So sports betting is starting to really kick off, and the World Cup will be a great opportunity for all sportsbook to take advantage of this situation, really promote this event. I think it will be a unique opportunity for everyone.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually that the Messi angle. I hadn't even put two and two together, but I'd imagine that Messi, and not just Messi, but Suarez, Busquets, Jordi Alba, all being at Inter Miami has been a huge driver of interest in soccer and the MLS in the US, which is that could be another factor. Even though DraftKings aren't in Florida, as we're all aware, that's still driving nationwide interest, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's funny you mentioned not only Messi, but all these Barcelona legends, because the Caribbean and the Mexican audiences are usually big fans of European football, and they do pick their European teams. And of course, Real Madrid and Barcelona are atop of those picks. Like a lot of fans for both teams. Let's keep it to Barcelona in this case. A lot of Barcelona fans, both in the Caribbean and in Mexico, and those are mostly the populations that eventually migrate to the United States and Canada. So it's definitely a big audience that DraftKings is surely smart to make a move on ahead of the World Cup, and in this context with all these Barca legends there in the MLS. But of course, this approach is not all across the United States. It's only a few select markets for the US and Ontario in Canada. So is this cautious rollout a sign of strategic testing, or does it reflect uncertainty about the size, do you think, of the Spanish speaking betting segment in North America, Charlie?
I think somewhat it's probably a bit of product testing, making sure that it works before you roll it out to everyone. But you've got to consider where the majority of the Spanish-speaking people are in the US, and the states with the biggest proportion of people who speak Spanish are California, Texas, New Mexico, and Florida. Now, DraftKings aren't in any of those states,
right?
So which is interesting. But obviously, with the rollout of their prediction markets, who knows? Maybe they do that in Spanish as well. That speculation, we'll wait and see. I know you're a big fan of that phrase there. So, but other states where they are live, Arizona, New Jersey, New York, Illinois, all have around 12 to 15% of their populations who are Spanish first speaking. So I would imagine they concentrate it around those states first, and then and Ontario as well. But who knows? Maybe this is just a short testing period before they roll it out to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of rolling out to everyone, they are expecting to move into Puerto Rico soon. Do you think this could mean that they are looking like the not only move an eventual future move into Puerto Rico, but also the Spanish option for their users? Do you think it could be a sign of a broader strategy to move into Latin America, or do you think it's just because Puerto Rico is a part of or somewhat part of the United States?
Yeah, I think anything I would say here would be speculation, because I haven't followed Jason Robbins' every thought and strategy meeting intently. But I think would Mexico make sense for DraftKings? Perhaps, maybe ahead of the World Cup. Maybe that makes sense to align and be live in Canada, the US, and Mexico. Maybe that's something they would look at. Maybe they look at Brazil as a market which is booming, that's had an interesting first year. So perhaps they might look at that in the future, but I don't think there's any concrete plans to go into Latin America just yet. Puerto Rico, part of the United States, and happens to be Spanish speaking as well. So I think that just lines up quite neatly. But yeah, I guess that would, if they were going to expand geographically across other markets, LatAm would make the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely. But like you said, I think they have enough with the US so far, so I hardly see them making any moves into Latin America in the short term. But we will be doing a move into Latin America and their markets after this very quick ad break. We'll be right back.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
And we're back with more iGaming Daily to continue discussing the betting and the iGaming industry in the world, like we do all the time. But it's been a while since we last talked about Latin American markets, like we already said a few times in this episode already. But there has been some movement lately in Latin America, so I think we should definitely tackle the industry. Why don't we first start with what I reckon is one of the biggest stories lately, which is out of Paraguay, which is finally ending its monopoly on the lottery, also known as Quiniela. So, Dami, why don't you break down a little bit what happened in Paraguay?
Yes, Fer, like you mentioned, Paraguay's National Gambling Commission announced the opening of the bidding process for the operation of the National Lottery, one of the country's most traditional games. Is starting in 2026, up to 3 companies will be able to operate the game, breaking the exclusivity model that has been in place for decades. The call for bids comes 5 years after the last concession was awarded in 2020 to the company TDP. The bidding documents will soon be available for purchase at a cost of 100 million guaranis, which is approximately $15,000. And the new system is expected to run until 2031, and the current concession holder will continue operating until the selection and awarding process is completed, which is scheduled for the coming months.
Do you have $50,000 to spare? It's for a personal project. If you have, let me know. But meanwhile, let's move from Paraguay into Peru, from P2P, which in Peru, they keep fighting the irresistible urge to raise taxes. We have discussed this in previous episodes, so after this episode, you can go back and search Peru on your preferred podcasting platform, Peru iGaming Daily, and you will find more information about this market. But they seem to be pushing a new tax increase that could raise the rates to 3 times the current one. What's going on, Dami, in Peru?
Yes, fair. Peru this year has been quite a lot of challenge, a lot of news coming from them. Right now, the Peruvian Congress will soon be debating a new bill that will modify some aspects of the current gambling regulations. The aim is to address tax loopholes, clarify regulatory powers, and streamline the tax system applicable to the activity. According to the proposal, the Ministry of Economy and Finance will be able to modify the rates of the selective consumption tax within a range of 0.3 to 7% for both online gambling and sports betting. Furthermore, the bill proposes immediately tripling the rate from 1 to 3% upon the publication of the legislation.
Yeah, well, I can't claim to be a huge expert of the Peru market, but what I can say is that this is a market that only opened in 2024, I believe, and to go in and change the tax rates after 18 months just gives off a real sense of uncertainty for operators who have invested time, resources, staff to this market, and for the authorities to say that we can change it whenever we want, and we could go from anywhere between 0.3% all the way up to 7%. That's the sort of uncertainty that businesses just don't like, and operators will have to put mitigation plans in place, and that is something that we have seen in the UK this week or last week, in the wake of the budget, where we saw taxes on online casinos go all the way up to 40%. So there is this whole re-regulation period that we're going through, and even in markets that are still growing like Peru. So it's a very tough time for operators at the minute, and there's a lot of forward planning that needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Peru, like you said, launched its market in 2024, but it was actually a relaunch from a previous regulation that they identified was flawed. So they maybe correctly or maybe not. I'll leave the analysis to each listener to do, but they identified that the regulation needed changes, so they did it, and they approved a regulatory framework in 2024. That's okay. This is the definitive rule book that we're gonna play by, and now all of a sudden they are pushing a new taxation. So yeah, definitely something you don't like to see in any business, because it creates that uncertainty you were mentioning that seems to be ruling over the industry everywhere right now at the moment. But speaking of uncertainty, some companies that have sponsorship deals in Peru or that have marketing campaigns going on may have their eyebrows raised, because there's also a potential advertising ban project going on in Peru, Dami.
Yes, fair. Peru is not slowing down this week. Last week, actually. Congresswoman Susel Paredes introduced a bill proposing a complete ban on advertising any form of gambling in the country. The initiative proposes restriction for traditional media like TV, radio, and print publication, as well as digital media and public spaces like public transportation, billboards, sporting and cultural events. The text of the project states that advertising would be prohibited in all its forms, including announcements, promotions, sponsorships, and even indirect advertising such as product placement or incentives that encourage participation in gambling.
And actually, advertising is quite big in Peru. There's a lot of companies that have their own campaigns going on, right?
Yeah, it's quite big. For example, the operator Apuesta Total is the sponsor of two major football teams in Peru, which are Alianza Lima and Universitario. Also, the company is the sponsor of the Peruvian Women's Football League and 6 teams from the Women's Volleyball League. Another operator that sponsors different Peruvian football clubs is Dorado Bet. The company supports Sporting Cristal, Cusco FC, and Cienciano. So the gaming companies are quite involved in the advertising industry, especially in sports.
Yeah, definitely not a good look for gaming companies if this advertising ban goes through. Of course, it's a very early stage, but Charlie, we probably discussed this a million times already. I think every single country in Latin America has pushed its own advertising ban, so the question remains the same. How do you see a potential ban in Peru impacting the industry? How would it impact the industry, considering the experience that other European countries had in the past with similar pushes?
Yeah, well, we do see this pushback against gambling advertising in lots of different markets around the world. And even if it doesn't result in legislative change, regulatory change, there is still consistent pushback. We see it in the UK, we see it in Europe, we see it in the US and Canada. But I think what I would say, particularly on Peru, is, again, this is a growing market. This is a market where operators have come in since 2024. They're looking to get brand awareness. They need to be able to advertise what they do so that players know who they are, where they can go. Otherwise, it's a well-trodden argument, but the black market is going to be the beneficiary, because the black market doesn't care about your laws. The black market doesn't care about your regulation. They will find a way to target players, to advertise what they do to them via social media, via other means, maybe affiliate groups and whatnot. And therefore you will see Peruvian players sent to the black market where we don't want them. We would rather have them with the regulated operators. So, and that's not to go into another argument that we've laid out on the podcast as well, which is, in sport, which other industries are ready to step in and fill that revenue gap if those sports teams, those football clubs, those basketball teams can't have gambling operators on their front of shirt, or as a LED sponsor, or any of these other different activations they do? Who fills that gap? So sport loses out, the players lose out, operators lose out, and yeah, I'm yet to see it work, really. We see advertising bans in Europe, in certain jurisdictions in Europe. I think the Netherlands is one of them that have tried this, but you look at the channelization rates in the Netherlands and they're pretty poor in terms of the black market is getting bigger. We see it in Germany as well, where there are quite stringent regulations on what you can and can't do, and the black market is huge there. So it's a well-trodden argument, but it's a well-trodden argument for a reason.
Yes, absolutely. And it's, of course, something that's not exclusive to Peru, like we said. Argentina, Chile, you name it. Every country is going through the same right now. So you make sure you are subscribed to the SBC Noticias newsletter so you can keep up to date with all that's happening across Latin America. And, of course, subscribe to all SBC Media newsletters so you can find out what's going on across the global gaming and betting industry. But that has been all for today's episode of iGaming Daily. A lot to consider. DraftKings and their Spanish option for Hispanic audiences across North America. A lot of regulation updates in Latin America. So it's been great to have you both on. Damian Martinez, Charlie Horner. Thank you very much, Ania McDonald, for producing this episode. I'm Fernando Noodt, and to our listeners out there, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.